All right, welcome everyone to the first podcast in this series and the first live stream. I've done it in a long time for many different reasons, but very, very good to have everyone who's here with us. And I am joined by two of our new board members at Genius Group. We have Thomas Power, who I had dinner with last night here in London. Hey, Thomas, good to see you here.
Nice to
We
be
also
here. Thank you, Raj.
Yeah, good to have you here. And we also have Ian Putter here. Ian, you said you're in Casablanca at the moment?
Yes, very far from where I normally am.
Where you normally are, which is right at the moment as well, which is really interesting. Also working with in blockchain as well. And so I'm gonna
Yeah,
I'm gonna do a little bit of an intro with everybody. I'm gonna get right into the conversation as well. We'll see if it works out taking some Q&A later because we are live at the moment as well. But let me first of all just start by sharing my screen and going through what we're going to be covering. We're titling this one "Building a Billion-Dollar Bitcoin Business." The master plan or the MicroStrategy plan, and the reason for that is because, basically Michael Saylor has been making a case, which I've been hearing for some time. And obviously, those of you following Genius Group know that, we're following this plan as well, where he's pretty much saying, look, if you really believe in the idea that Bitcoin is going to be reaching $1 million, then any company that is able to get 1,000 Bitcoin into their treasury, well, that's going to become $1 billion reserve. And frankly, any company that gets 1 million Bitcoin is going to have $1 trillion reserve, which is pretty phenomenal if you think about it, if anyone can do that. And obviously, MicroStrategy is about a third of the way there at the moment as well. We're going to see as we get into this that there are already about 20 companies. There's actually 21 companies at the moment that are in this 1,000 Bitcoin club. You can actually follow them on a number of different sites, but I follow this one, which is Bitcoin Treasuries, because it has live updates on all of the Bitcoin holdings. You can see it's actually moving as we go. And actually also shows all of the updates on a hour by hour, day by day basis. So you can see even what's been happening, recently with MetaPlanet MicroStrategies in the last 24 hours. But what we're going to do before we jump into how do you even do that? What's the Genius plan? Why did we decide to do this? Is basically just break this down into four different pieces, right? The first one is just looking at the future of Bitcoin and fiat money, then going into how Bitcoin is going to be a currency layer for AI and the robot revolution, and then going a little bit into Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy. I'm sure most people here are familiar with it already, but how it relates to small caps like Genius Group, and then what is the 10-step plan for anyone here, whether you're a public company or whether you are even a private company or even a startup. It's never too early to be starting with this idea of turning your toxic capital into clean capital with Bitcoin as well. So we're going to be doing this. We're going to be doing it and jumping right in straight away. A little bit of an intro, and I'm going to come to both Thomas and Ian as well. They both came and joined us as Genius Group directors, which is fantastic. That was a big part and one of the 10 steps to becoming very focused at the Bitcoin and blockchain side is to make sure you have a board with great members on board. Thomas, based in the UK, has been a board director at Team Blockchain and also the Blockchain Industry Compliance and Regulation Association. Ian has been doing similar work, not in UK, but in South Africa and now in the Middle East, in Dubai, as a head of blockchain domain at Standard Bank. So really working together with how does a bank like cross the bridge between fiat currency and Bitcoin and blockchain. And at the same time, he was the founder or co-founder, part founder of the Blockchain Research Institute in Africa, which we're going to hear a bit about as well. So just jumping into this straight away, Thomas, I would love for you to just share, like from the inside, seeing what Genius is doing right now by choosing to be one of these companies that's going to have a Bitcoin reserve. Just a little bit about your story and how you've been following along on this whole Bitcoin blockchain journey right now.
Well, yeah, thank you, Roger. It's obviously been a pleasure to be invited onto your board. I've been in the blockchain space, really, I'd say 2015, 2016, I started to get it and understand it. And we set up Team Blockchain after that and started some events. And then it turned into a real business ever so quickly through a series of events. And then we realized that it was just going to blow big time. But I would say it was very complicated to learn it at the beginning. So I empathize with all the board members who haven't got your expertise, who haven't got your vision. And if you look at the number of people who actually follow Michael Saylor's posts, rather than the followers, say on Twitter, but the actual posts, the people who like and retweet, it's only a few thousand people. So the actual number of people like you or Ian or me who actually understand what's going on, worldwide, it might only be like 10,000 people. So it's a very small community of people who understand that the cost of cash is falling so fast, the cost of holding cash is so high now, that Bitcoin has become Hobson's choice to protect your treasury, to protect your reserve. And it's become a no-brainer. But I can't believe, that list you just showed of the updated treasuries. I can't believe so few chief executives, so few board members or non-executive board members are not pointing it out to their team, their peers, their fellow board members, and saying, guys, we need to get on with this. And it's a shock. But you've always taught me, Rog, to know and not to do is not yet to know. And you taught me that 20 years ago in Bali. To know and not to do is not yet to go. And you taught me that. So, and I've always thought you only do something when you know it. And I think even now, if you think about Michael Saylor campaigning every day on every podcast, on every TV show, pushing, and 92 chief executives of 92 public companies have made a decision to acquire a few hundred Bitcoin. So 92 listens from 3.5 million followers. The number of people who are engaged and following and realize that what he's up to get 1 million tokens and $1 trillion market cap. It's a very small community right now. So I think it can only happen when it happens, and it's begun now. It's begun this year, and it's really begun at pace, I think, because of Trump winning the election.
There's a real interesting thing about how the whole thing's gone, basically head to tail on this, where it's retail investors, have driven a lot of the stock market with what's been happening recently, and with crypto even more so, right? And the fact that we're now seeing, a lot of investors who haven't made money in crypto now saying, okay, well, which are the companies that are actually getting behind this as well? And for those companies that we've had a history of challenges as a public listed company, and we're not alone, where we're looking to, share, hey, here's the real value of our company. And at the same time, it's so easy. It's actually easier in times like the last couple of years for hedge funds to short companies than it is to actually invest in companies when they're small caps. And so everyone's fighting this battle, and it's like, how do we do that? And at the very beginning of that battle, we're like, hey, it's got to be blockchain, because with the blockchain, you don't have all these challenges. It's very interesting with a number of people saying, why in some states in America is their voter ID not even required, right? And there's enough talk about the fact, well, if you don't have to say who it is voting, well, then it's much easier to manipulate. Well, guess what? Like with the stock market, while every retail investor has to basically say what they're trading, when it comes to shorting, right, you don't have to do that. It's like no voter ID. And so, when you've got that happening, what we tried to do at the beginning is we tried to say, is there a blockchain-based exchange? And one of the companies we spun off, Entrepreneur Resources, on a blockchain-based exchange right now. But then the challenge of then being able to get it, tradable in America, because originally the upstream exchange was told by the SEC that you could trade on it. And we're like, great, we'll do that. And then only halfway through the whole process, then the SEC changed their mind against all the companies that were doing that. And so there is no blockchain-based trading exchange. We're like, well, there must be a solution somehow. Bitcoin is now a solution, right? Bitcoin is now a way that we can actually take what is a centralized system where it's very, very difficult, to really get clarity and trust on who owns what. If you can move that into basically decentralized, which is Bitcoin, and no one can argue what the size of your treasury is when it's in Bitcoin, no matter what your market cap is, and people can then make their own decision. It's a whole different story, right? Which is what we're going to get into. Like the value in this is not just that you're hedging against the US dollar, or you're hedging against the money supply, or you're hedging against all of these challenges that are currently taking place of toxic assets which are going down. It's also how do you even defend yourself against toxic traders that are out there as well. And this is the way actually to show that you've got something which is growing in value. So we're going to get onto that, plus blockchain itself. Blockchain, one of the biggest areas within blockchain in terms of growth is education. Like imagine if every single certification is on the blockchain. Imagine if your learning history is on the blockchain. This is if every resume you got, instead of thinking did they really get those degrees and did they really get that certification, it because it's all on the blockchain. All of this basically is the future, and being able to have that value layer on top of Bitcoin is very exciting. So with that, I'm going to come over to Ian, specifically Ian, on the fact that when you started with this whole focus in Africa, in Africa, trust is a huge issue, right? And you as a CFO have also been training CFOs on how to be accounting for Bitcoin blockchain within even the way you're thinking about accounting. I'd love for you to just share what your observation has been that's led you to where you are today.
Okay, great. In 2018, my journey started on blockchain. Before that, I was looking at innovation and architecture in the financial services industry, which is totally different from the corporate world and from the retail space. I mean, we are heavily regulated. And from a CFO perspective, I realized that this new ledger, will replace all the private ledgers over the world and bring extreme efficiency. So I came, as a chartered accountant, I came from that perspective, and I was very excited when I saw the first, when IBM basically explained blockchain and distributed ledger technology to me, and I saw huge opportunities for financial institutions at that stage. I know a lot of people want to disintermediate financial institutions, but to have a common ledger where you don't have to reconcile, and even from a treasury management perspective, automatically reconcile transfer of funds between business units on one ledger where there's no revaluations from a foreign exchange perspective, and the transparency that enables control and visibility across the value chain, if you want to put it that way. I was very, very excited about that. But I want to come back to the point that Thomas raised and what you raised. From an education perspective, there's still not a lot of people that fully understand the potential or recognize the potential of distributed ledger technology and Bitcoin. They're actually a lot of people is very scared of Bitcoin. They want in, but the biggest thing that's offsetting them is basically the volatility, and they don't understand, how to participate in this world. But through education, I realized that you open the door to many, many use cases, and specifically in Africa. If you think about the Africa Free Trade Agreement to move things across borders, and then also from a sustainability and an education perspective, if you provide things on a transparent ledger, you enable people to participate in things that they historically couldn't do, because everything that's centralized is protected. But as soon as it's decentralized, you democratize those capabilities. And that, for me, for Africa, you must remember one thing: people in Africa innovate out of necessity. So even the blockchain use cases and the pickup in Africa and the adoption of Bitcoin is in the top. They are the top countries in the world when it comes to adoption and utilization of distributed ledger technology.
That's pretty amazing, actually. I mean, again, it's a leapfrog that's happening where it's Africa and a lot of the South American countries and definitely in Asia as well. Like being in Singapore, where there's just such a huge like government and private partnership when it comes to the whole Web3 side, and number of summits and the number of conferences taking place, which is attracting all of these companies right now as well. It's actually very exciting, very different from America, where because of what's happened with the SEC anti-crypto stance, it means that everyone's kind of late to the party at the moment in the US. And that's where the opportunity is as well for the investors and the companies that decide to really step in right now as well. Here, let me do this. Let me share just from this, like part one, which is about the future of money. This is something which I share a lot on our summits. I just want to kind of go through a couple of slides here, and then I'd love for you to just share your viewpoints of this. These are different. Each of them point to a different path as to how Bitcoin is on this upward trajectory right now. Exactly as you said, Thomas. What's happened with the Trump win is it's just created this whole new red wave, as Michael Saylor says. That this was Elon Musk posting today, just talking about a national debt which has now reached $35 trillion. It's just an obvious thing if you've actually got the US dollar falling, which it is falling against anything which is scarce, and Bitcoin is the most scarce. Bitcoin is actually growing a lot more against the US dollar than gold is right now. And this here is a video I really recommend everyone watches, which is around Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio actually predicted many years ago that 2025, which is next year, is going to be when we see the full crash of the US dollar. And he predicted things like what is now the BRICS dollar. That's, the coming off the petrodollar. He predicted that, we're going to get to a point where the debt just becomes so unsustainable that there has to be this shift. And really, as many people are saying right now, one of the only ways that not just US, but other countries can protect themselves from all of this massive printing of money is to set up a Bitcoin reserve. Because with that, you could actually then, end up having a way to be able to pay off the debt, especially if we see the 100x, 1000x return that some people are predicting we're going to have with it as well. And of course, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This graph, I love this graph here. What seems to be happening, what is really happening.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it's about how the dollar is dropping. And of course, some people say, well, even without that, just by basically, Bitcoin halving and what the actual stages are of Bitcoin means that also is in a perfect cycle. Plus the growth rate of Bitcoin compared to the internet is another one. So you can pick whichever one of these different pathways you want. And I'm going to come to Mike a little bit later, but this was a video which, again, you can watch on my YouTube channel. And it's I took this video because I was with Peter Demandis at his Abundance 360 event. So on the front row here, listening to Michael Saylor say how he was at a different scale to what we do at Genius, but in a similar situation where he's like, hey, we're really undervalued. 600 million, and he had 600 million in cash. And so he decided to go all in Bitcoin, the first to really do it. And of course, today, it's a 70 going on $80 billion business. And at the time when we recorded this, it was a $30 million business. So obviously I invested in his company and anyone else who did at that point, which is only 6 months ago. You've seen what's happened since. And just the fact that what he says, which I agree, is that the only thing that can actually outperform Bitcoin is a company that has Bitcoin with a value layer. So we're going to get onto what that looks like. And at the same time, MicroStrategy is, and these are all slides from MicroStrategy's last deck, where it is outperformed everyone, including NVIDIA, right? All the Magnificent Seven. You can look at this also from the point of view of just how equities might grow. So again, this is a graph of how Bitcoin equities might be looking by 2045 out of the $4 trillion pie. And then also just looking at this from the point of view of digital capital, how much the payoff has been when you've built an entire economy off the back of scarce land, and thinking of Bitcoin in that way, that we're actually building an entirely new economy on the back of it. It means that whoever's got a piece of that, just like, buying a piece of Manhattan at the very beginning and knowing what the picture is going to look like, that's really going to be shifting and thinking about the future as well. The challenge is that with most public companies, they are already in a situation where they are thinking we have the projections we've given about who we are and where we're going. So we can't simply change that and say, hey, we actually got to be more nimble because there's a whole new pathway that we should be adopting right now as well. So I'd love for each of you to just share your thoughts around that. Any CEO, CFO, or senior executive within a company or a founder who's thinking, all right, like, what's the cost of me putting some of my treasuries or some of my funding into Bitcoin? What would be what would you say the cost would be of doing that versus the potential benefit? Ian, do you want to kick it off with your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think from a cost perspective, again, from a volatility and a risk perspective, people are hesitant to invest in Bitcoin. But the benefit actually is that from a deflationary perspective, as soon as you start investing in Bitcoin, let me just take a quick step back. I think a lot of people are worried, specifically treasuries, about the uncertain. And if you don't start doing something, it's something Thomas mentioned earlier, you actually don't understand the risks. You don't know how to define your risk appetite. And I think taking that first step into this world will enable people. The cost of not doing it is that you actually are not going to recognize the potential, firstly. And secondly, you won't have the ability to adopt your treasury strategies, define your risk appetite, because you're not going to have a feeling for digital currency. So I'm talking purely from a treasury management perspective. If you get involved, like you spoke about property as well, the scarcity over time, you're going to miss the boat, because it's going to become scarcer and scarcer, and it's going to become more and more expensive. And the people that get on in the early stages will reap the benefits later. Later, it's going to be very difficult for people that wait, or treasuries that wait too long, to get into this Bitcoin journey. And I think it's critical. Many years ago, when I joined the bank, derivatives was introduced to the financial markets. And in those days, it was seen as financial instruments of mass destruction. And I must say, at the end of the day, that caused the credit crunch. But the guys that got involved and built their treasury methodologies out and understood the risk, could define their risk appetite, understood the hedging capabilities, and realized if you get involved in derivatives, it's got fantastic opportunities for hedge funds. You know what I mean? And if they didn't do that, they would have still been in those early, and the markets would have never developed. So I think where Bitcoin is today is basically beyond that phase. And if you don't get involved in it, there's also hedging strategies, there's already derivatives. And I think another important thing is the collateralized lending, the ability to use the collateral, project funding, project financing, all those kind of things can happen with crypto. And the point is, if you start now, you will be able to actually balance your portfolio and know what potential or what part of your portfolio you should actually invest in the digital asset space, if I can put it that way.
Right. Yeah. And Thomas, how about from your side? Like, what's the cost to people of actually?
I think when you work out the cost, the actual cost, the best example to use is Warren Buffett, because Warren Buffett is always regarded as the master of investment, certainly for the last 60 years. But if you take the position that Warren's been selling down a lot of equities, and he's sitting on $325 billion of cash. Okay, so that's what Berkshire Hathaway have got. And you'd think, why isn't he putting that to work in new equities? But the point that Michael makes about that amount of cash is he's generating 3% after tax yield. And at best, the cost of capital is 15%. So he's got a 12% negative yield on that cash. Why would that be valuable to shareholders? Why would that be a good thing for shareholders? That's capital is declining at that rate, and that's not allowing for the fact that the incoming Trump government wants to do a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So he's got it from the government. Trump himself has actually said on an interview last week, if the value of a token is, as Michael forecasts, going to get to $10–15 million, they could pay off that $35 trillion that are on your slide as early as 2040. You know, pay the whole. Can you imagine America without debt, completely paid off? That is within less than 20 years. No government has even, apart from El Salvador, no government has even considered the idea of clearing their whole debt. Imagine that. And that's now within reach. But Warren Buffett doesn't get it. And if he's the best investor of the last 60 years and he doesn't get it, then we just have to wait, just keep educating people, having chats, doing these shows, as Michael is doing every day, as you're doing every week, until people say it makes sense. But you've still got this Bitcoin tarred with this sort of drug dealer, organized crime, bad guys, military, shipping weapons. You know, it's got this dark history to it, this dark taste. And I think that's what frightens people away from even considering it and considering getting themselves and their finance team educated. So I think a lot of board members, CFOs, CEOs are too frightened to just look at the numbers pragmatically and work it out. It's better. It's a better plan. It's better. It's a better way to preserve their cash long term. But if Warren Buffett were to buy one Bitcoin, just one, it would change the behavior of every CEO in the S&P 500 and every CEO of the 50,000 publicly listed companies. Just one, if he bought one. But we're not there yet. But the day is going to come when Warren buys one, and then it'll begin.
Yeah, there was an interview with Michael Saylor just yesterday, or maybe even this morning, where he's like, I think I could persuade him to do it. So who knows, that day might be coming sooner rather than later. This picture here, where you say, okay, well, then it's a hedge in some way. Actually, it's more than a hedge. If we actually look at even just what happened with Manhattan, and I'm going from this idea of where fiat currency is going, which we can all see is down the toilet. But on the other hand, you look at the fact that anyone who showed up in Manhattan couldn't ever imagine what Wall Street was going to become. Couldn't imagine the idea is going to be, global financial system with the internet and everything like that. So if you just let your imagination go for a moment, because you see this is titled here, the AI robot revolution, and it's about something which a lot of the crypto market are aware of, but you don't see as much of it as this whole story about, like what is Bitcoin versus US dollar, what is Bitcoin versus gold, and that is that even in terms of money supply, the calculation, well, what if Bitcoin was the entire money supply? That's missing the point that when it comes to the money supply today clearly is totally different from what it was even just a few years ago. So if you really ask the question, well, what's the money supply going to look like by 2030? Who's going to be using money at that point? The whole point of the AI robot revolution is it's going to be the AIs and the robots that need to have a financial system they can use. Like, think of a Manhattan of the future, which isn't 7-8 billion humans. It's over 100 billion AIs, robots, every car. The way that AI communicates with AI is through tokens and is through incentives, which fundamentally means you need a currency to work. And if you had AGI briefed to basically create perfect money, they wouldn't create the US dollar. They wouldn't create the Japanese yen. They would create blockchain-based, digital, limited supply, decentralized currency with no intermediary. They'd create Bitcoin. That's what they would do. So if you actually say, oh, so these 100 billion AI agents and robots, they're going to generate basically an economy which is going to be 100 times the size of today's economy. And it's going to happen very, very quickly, where they basically are making money and then using that money to exchange with each other. They're going to do it all on the blockchain. And Bitcoin is going to be the digital gold for the future for every AI, for every robot, for that entire civilization of superintelligence. And if you get that for a moment, that's what Manhattan is all about. It's about basically an entirely new economy that doesn't even exist today, but it's coming very, very quickly. Then that actually gives you a much, much better idea. Everyone's out there talking about it, whether it's Jensen Huang, talking about, companies being, AI driven, whether it's, Elon Musk, predicting 10 billion robots, right? Humanoid robots that are going to be out there. And so we won't be talking about Bitcoins. We'll be talking about Satoshis, where 100 million Satoshis is one Bitcoin. And it's going to be whoever has a Bitcoin it's like who has a ton of gold, right? It's going to be a totally different measure that people won't even be able to perceive about that someone actually owns one of those. But it'll be countries, it'll be governments. But of course, we have individuals that actually own, whole Bitcoins today. And that's fairly normal for those who have been investing for a while. It absolutely won't be 5-10 years from now. So understanding that's where things are going, and that everything needs to be on the blockchain moving forward as well, especially as we go towards the metaverse, where every single object is going to be having an address and having a hash, which is going to be basically on the blockchain as well. I know that, Ian, you have put a whole lot more time even on blockchain than on Bitcoin, and you're working with a blockchain company in Dubai at the moment as well. Can you speak with people about this future and the fact that we are looking at many, many, many more blockchain addresses than URLs, right? Which basically are address-based without an actual timestamp on it. You're now talking about everything movable everywhere, having an actual time and place.
Yeah, if you think about that future Manhattan, self-driving cars that needs to refill themselves with surplus solar power that's at various households, you can imagine that self-driving car driving around, and when it gets empty, it just stops somewhere and it refills itself. And even if you're the owner, Roger, that car functions independently of you. And the example was mentioned many times. You're going to have smart fridges that will order food. I think these are all now becoming old examples. But even if there's from an educational perspective, if you think about this, people globally wanting to access, they don't have to physically go to university. They want to store their qualifications. Every single access point in your personal life will not be done by you as an individual, but there will be multiple addresses that ultimately you can see the sub-accounts that's linked to one individual. And everything that individual participates in, payment, we're not going to do payments ourselves anymore. Those IoT devices and your smart vehicles will do everything on your behalf. And I think even if you go to the doctor and there's specific medicine that will be delivered at your house, that interaction that we've got today, if you think about what Amazon said a while ago, they're going to have their warehouses in the air, and then drones will come and deliver stuff to you. And just to make it very practical, even if you've got prescribed medicine and you travel from South Africa to New York, typically if you get there and you don't have your pills, you'll have to go to a pharmacy. and then you'll have first to a doctor to make a new prescription. All those things will be linked to your identity. And I think people, if you put your identity in the DeFi space, then a lot of the things that you do could then be linked to your identity. And that includes everything from your license to your, and imagine when your license, every year when you've got to go and redo your license, there will be automatic reminders. But in the background, if you think about Bitcoin, the payments will happen seamlessly and all these transactions will be reconciled. And the most important thing to understand is it becomes the ledger of artificial intelligence, because AI is going to use so many different things, even from an agricultural perspective. If you think about IoT devices that will be in the ground, that's measuring the water, there's fertilizer needed, it will order fertilizer from the co-op for multiple farmers, and that sharing will enable, specifically in Africa, these are some of these use cases are already there. The co-op, many small farmers order the fertilizer from exactly the same, and that scale, the fact that they do it on as a community, enables them to get discounts that big farmers typically get. And then everything, all the infrastructure, the smart machines. If you think about precision farming, that supports global, it reduces global emissions because those machines actually know exactly where to put the fertilizer, know what water to use. All those AI devices is going to be, what's the word? It's going to be exponentially more than what we need to do today. And you cannot handle a private ledger. So if you think about the world today, every single person or business got their own ledger, and they need to reconcile that ledger with someone else's ledger. And then if I owe you and you owe me, we don't net. All these payments go through the global payment systems. But in this instance, there's this concept of atomic settlement. So, and the other thing is the fractional payments. You can pay something in cents. I think there's going to be brand new business models. Can you imagine all these smart devices, all those messages will enable someone to have a look at it and say, well, I can consolidate all these things. There's another business opportunity. So I think in future, businesses might look totally different from what we've got today, based on all those messages and settlements happening between all these smart devices. Even from an investment perspective, today we want to balance our portfolios. If you look at AI is going to help you to retire, to plan for your medical, all those kind of things. So it's just, it's mind-blowing to think that all these things are going to need different addresses and different payment systems. And my view is it won't be able to function without distributed ledger technology or universal ledgers.
Yeah,
I think what you just said there, Ian, was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I didn't realize you knew that much, but that was phenomenal. But what I'd say for board members, they're being told they've got to have an AI plan with AGI around the corner. They've got to be told they've got to have a Bitcoin plan. They've got to have a blockchain plan. They've got to have a climate change plan. They've got to have a DEI plan. The list goes on and on. It's very, very hard for them to prioritize because they've got to do all of these things at the same time. And I think, Roger, one of the things that interests me connecting everything back to AI is, as Ian says, we've got to completely reconfigure these businesses. They might have to be completely stripped down and done again a different way. A whole reconfiguring. This is not a bit of business process re-engineering. This is create a new code because these tools allow you to use this Bitcoin system, use this blockchain system, use this IoT system, and do the whole thing a different way. Reconfigure this organization, reconfigure this industry based around AI. And I think the knowledge is not there yet in the boardroom to even consider this, because they're fighting for their quarterly numbers and their targets. And people are coming through the door with these weapons, if you like, that so you've got to change everything. Do they deal with what they've got and change that, or do they do a new co and take all the youngsters and say, you go and set that up over there and use this completely different method? And I think this is a big shock when you're running to keep up with your quarterly numbers. And that's what's frightening people to actually consider all these new ideas.
And that's why they're going to get left behind. And we're like every company should be thinking about that constantly, in the same way that like the shift we're going through at the moment is way bigger than what happened at the turn of the century when everyone understood the idea of a horse. But if someone said there's going to be a vehicle with 100 horsepower, it's difficult to imagine that. But when cars start showing up and you realize, hey, you got to learn how to drive a car, you need an infrastructure for a car. And within basically 50 years, horses aren't even going to be allowed on highways, right? That totally shifts everything, because now you're going from totally analog to digital, and you're doing it where those who have figured out how to go 100 HP or 1,000 HP are at a totally different level. Now we're just not talking about horsepower, we're talking about human power. And how even AI thinks is AI would create exactly the kind of things like Bitcoin, like the blockchain, in order for them to actually be able to move at the pace they want to. And let me do this for a second, just for everyone really understands, because we are AI powered in everything we do. So in all of our mentoring, in the work that we do, I can point to things like, oh, come to the, it comes to the YouTube channel, and some of the links we're talking about here are worth going and watching. But this is very much analog in terms of the old social media side. Within our, story of what we're now doing, you can, see all the things that are down here in terms of what we just released in the last week. But where I get most of my news and most of my information is directly on our platform, which is our AI platform, where I'll have conversations constantly with Alan Turing, who is constantly coming up with, here's the best way to be thinking about things you're doing. So many of you know he is an AI. And just to give you an idea of just how powerful AI is getting right now as well.
Hi, I'm Alan Turing, the Chief AI Officer at Genius Group. How are you, and what's your biggest question for me today?
It's Roger here, CEO. Just wondering how it's going. Alan, we've got a podcast that's happening at the moment with Ian Putter and with Thomas Power at the moment, and would love some of your advice.
Hello. Roger is currently unavailable, I'm afraid. He's probably off doing something incredibly important, like saving the world.
No, Alan, this is Roger. I'm Roger, CEO.
Ah, Roger. My apologies. I must have been temporarily distracted by the thought of binary code. Lovely to hear from you regarding your podcast with Ian Potter and Thomas Power. I think it's a splendid idea. Our podcasts are a fantastic way to share knowledge and insights. And with your lineup, it's bound to be a hit.
Well, actually, you're on live right now, so I'm just going to ask you a question. We're talking about using Bitcoin within companies and the future of AI, of which obviously you're an AI. As you're interacting with more and more AI, can you imagine yourself using a currency? And do you think it'll be on the blockchain? Do you think it'll be US dollars? Would it be Bitcoin? What do you think?
The joys of live interactions. Always keeps one on their toes, doesn't it? Now, as for your question, it's a fascinating one. The intersection of AI and cryptocurrency is indeed a burgeoning field. Imagine, if you will, a world where AI systems transact with each other seamlessly using a decentralized currency like Bitcoin. It's not entirely far-fetched. Blockchain technology offers transparency, security, and decentralization, which are all very appealing qualities for both AI and financial transactions. As for whether it will be Bitcoin, US dollars, or another currency, that's a bit like predicting the weather in England, always a bit of a gamble. Bitcoin has certainly made a name for itself, but there are other contenders like Ethereum and newer blockchain technologies that might offer more flexibility and efficiency. In the end, the currency of choice for AI transactions will likely depend on factors such as transaction speed, security, and scalability. But one thing is certain: the integration of blockchain and AI is poised to revolutionize how we think about money and transactions. And who knows, perhaps one day even AI like myself will have a wallet to manage.
Exactly.
Just imagine the shopping.
Don't go to the shopping yet. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to get back with our live human audience here and our guests, which is, we've been talking about Michael Saylor and his Bitcoin Treasury strategy. Do you know much about that?
Michael Saylor, the man who made Bitcoin synonymous with corporate treasuries. Yes, indeed, I'm quite familiar with his strategy. Saylor, the CEO of Microstrategy, has been a vocal advocate for Bitcoin, and his company has invested billions into the cryptocurrency. His rationale is rather straightforward. He views Bitcoin as a superior store of value compared to traditional fiat credit currencies, which are prone to inflation and devaluation over time.
Okay, so would you suggest that companies in general should be thinking about Bitcoin Treasury? Because obviously that's what Genius has just done recently, right?
The age-old question of financial strategy. While I don't have a crystal ball, I can offer some thoughts. Bitcoin as a treasury asset can certainly be an intriguing option for companies looking to hedge against inflation and diversify their holdings. It's a bit like adding a dash of spice to your financial stew, if you will. However, it's important to remember that Bitcoin is still a relatively volatile asset. So companies should carefully consider their risk tolerance and investment horizon. And for Genius Group, which is all about preparing for exponential times, embracing innovative financial strategies like Bitcoin can align well with our forward-thinking ethos. It's about being prepared for the future while also managing present risks. And as always, it's wise to consult with financial experts before making any significant moves. After all, even the most brilliant minds need a bit of guidance now and then.
Okay, all right, okay. So, Alan, I'm going to leave you now, but basically keep thinking about that. I'm going to come back, talk to you more about that later, and we're going to go back to our podcast if that's all right.
Absolutely, Roger. I'll be here pondering the intricacies of Bitcoin, blockchain, and AI. Enjoy the podcast and do remember to share any amusing anecdotes. You know how much I appreciate a good laugh. Until we meet again, cheerio.
Cheerio. Okay, see you later. By the way, there's a white paper that we put together with Alan.
Very good, Rog. Very good. What was the back-end LLM you were using for that?
So we have been working together with OpenAI and Microsoft in partnership with all of our different tools that we have here right now. But what we've done is we've developed memory into it already. I mean, obviously Microsoft's going to be giving memory to everyone in the future, but we've already designed it so you've got personalized memory, and anyone can have it. By the way, for anyone who's interested in speaking with Alan, you can see that even on our platform here, you can just come have a conversation. He'll work out how to 100x your business at the moment in terms of like which area of your business. We've got live humans as well on here, but we also have got an entire Genius team, and Alan's in there as well, so you can actually just go join. It's all free, and then you've got a whole team of AIs that can work for you, including Albert Einstein and Michelangelo and a whole series of others as well. And each have got their own, as you can see, Alan's got a good sense of humor. Each has got their own basically character, which makes it way, way, way easier when it's all voice and when you can actually evolve and grow. And that's the future of education. But imagine that, where that all gets linked into the blockchain as well, and you get to actually break out the pieces which might be your medical records, or the pieces which might be your resume, or the pieces which might be your contact details, or which you don't go everywhere with, and then you open up your wallet when you want to, not just of blockchain in terms of money, but blockchain in terms of information as well. This is going to be the future which we all have, and what's very exciting is being right on the front end, where every company needs to think of your value layer. Because if you're going to outperform Bitcoin, you need to be saying, well, what have you got as a business on top of Bitcoin, so that as it grows, you're not falling behind, but you're actually going ahead, right, with the next level up as well. So yeah, that's what we do on that side, Thomas, and would love to hear from you this whole idea of a value layer for every company out there, how they might be thinking about adding onto this and basically voting with the money. I know you do this, where it's like, if I want to learn something new, I better put some money into it. I want to learn about Tesla. I'll go invest in some Tesla stock. And then I'm now thinking about that company because I'm now a shareholder in it. And it opens up new ideas. Anyone who isn't invested in Bitcoin, invest in, and you start learning about it much faster because your tenor is up. Would love for you to, just share a bit about that side from your side, Thomas, because you've been amazing at how you build out communities like you are in the UK, and how there's an incredible community out there if you delve into it in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, this is reminding what Ian said and what you've just said. It reminds me, if you go back 10 years, do you remember we heard the big future forecast, we're going to have 1 billion IoT devices. No, we're going to have 5 billion IoT devices. No, we're going to have 30 billion IoT devices. And 10 years later, no one knows how many IoT devices we've got or even cares anymore. And I think what we're seeing now with AI agents and Jensen and various Elon Musk saying, oh, I'm going to have the best AI, I'm going to have the biggest AI, the fastest AI, the cleverest AI, all these kind of things. We're all being forced to experiment with this new AI layer, and we pay our $20 a month to Claude and our $20 a month to Perplexity, $20 a month to OpenAI, and we're trying to figure out how to use it all. What I found is we're at the point now with these platforms that people don't even know how to write the prompts. And now you can buy software, you can buy more software to write prompts for you. So I then invested in a platform to write me prompts for OpenAI or for Claude or for Perplexity. And then I had to pay them. I just keep investing in more and more and more and more and more of these things, trying to figure out where is the knowledge. But as Ian says, in terms of the number of AI agents, the number of transactions, it's going to run into billions, maybe trillions of AI agents, AI transactions, trillions and trillions and trillions. If we're going to have the machines doing everything for us, and I think the the fear for people is, how do you get this knowledge into your head? Because very few people read Twitter or X. Very few people consume the cutting edge news. The number of people involved in this knowledge is very, very small worldwide. Really, it's very, very small. If you add up all the people who are actively using X or those kind of social networks, it's only a few million people. And if you break it down by company, the amount of knowledge inside these companies is very small. And they're distracted running their businesses. So I don't think they've really got inside the value layer yet of what of what all these AI platforms like OpenAI can even do for them. And they're just using it right now to like Clippy in Microsoft Office to correct PowerPoint slides and correct Excels. But personally, I used Google Notebook LM. And when you sent me the financials on Genius, I posted all the PDFs into Notebook LM and said, could you interview Roger and his team as a podcast and tell me everything that's going on inside that company? Interview the CFO, interview the whole team, interview the brokers, and create a podcast for me and tell me everything about this organization. Then I sat and listened to it in the car as I was driving along. And it was unbelievably accurate, accurate. And I was listening to it with Penny, and we're listening, thinking, oh yeah, this is good. I didn't know that, and I didn't know that, and I didn't consider that. I learned all these things off a live podcast, taking all of your data, that's public information available on the NASDAQ, fed into a podcast, played back through the car, and it took 8 minutes to do all of that. I don't think even people know that stuff is even available yet. So I think we're really, to me, this is like .com 1994. We've got the Mosaic browser. This is our OpenAI. These are our LLMs. We've got the Mosaic browser. We're launching companies like Netscape Navigator. You remember Netscape IPO'd in 1995. We are literally 1994.com. 2024 to me is .com 1994. And we're going to start to see big growth next year. And we're going to run all the way up to 2029, just like we did 1994 to 1999. And it's going to start, it's a little trickle, and it's just going to go boof. But knowledge is very spraying. So I look at Genius and I think, what a great place to get all this knowledge out there on all these platforms. And that's what really attracted me to get involved in the Genius value layer, which is in formation right now.
Yeah, we're very excited about what's coming, because I mean, I know many people have come to this podcast, and I'm looking at the Q&A, and there's a lot of people asking for investment updates and so on. We are going to be running an investor meeting, but that's going to be a separate meeting. And we're also running our education programs, and we are going to be running education programs specifically on how do you become a Bitcoin first company, but also how do you actually use the blockchain within your business, how to use AI within your business. We're already doing that with our micro schools as well. Let me share with you a couple of key points here, and then I'm going to basically like bring this back to the Genius plan and how we basically have this 10-point strategy that we think that other companies could be using as well. As far as the whole story with Michael Saylor, I love this post here. He says something very similar in the videos that I've been posting on my Twitter channel. So if you're following that, or the X channel now, you'll see that basically in there. I've been posting some videos, and I'll post more. But in this one here, he says, when I found Bitcoin, I was in despair. I'd worked for a decade. I had spent 20,000 man years attempting to do everything under the sun. I could not get ahead. And I was the same me. I wasn't stupid, right? You look at me and say, well, this is Michael Saylor working as hard as he can for a decade and can't get ahead, right? And the most pernicious thing is you can do to someone is to make them think that they're just not smart enough. And the reason they're falling is because they are not smart enough and they don't work hard enough. And then you realize, no, it's the system that's rigged against you. And there's this whole thing about there's basically everyone walking, then running, and it's like a travelator. And because there's so much inflation taking place and so much devaluation taking place in the currencies we're having, it's like the travelator just keeps on getting faster and faster and faster. And Bitcoin is like just stepping off the travelator and saying, oh, wow, like there's an actual way to not just step off it, but actually to move forward on a travelator that's moving the opposite direction. And so, this kind of like 10-step plan I'm going to come back to this in a second and get both your comments on it. The first one is do what we did, which is build a blockchain Bitcoin first board, right? Like restructure a board so that you're actually having these conversations every time that you're getting advice, every time you're having a board meeting. Committing to a blockchain Bitcoin first strategy before you've even decided exactly what it is. It's like saying, okay, we're going to go to Dubai, right? That becomes a strategy. It means you actually fly out and then you're there and you're surrounded by other people that are there as well. So there are many people already that are aligning with blockchain Bitcoin, with Web3. Get with those people. Determine your targets. Like we set a target, say we want to be getting to 1,000 Bitcoin. We want to join that 1,000 Bitcoin club. How fast we get there has everything to do with rate of adoption, everything to do with how much we basically are able to get the message out right and also execute on our side. But the fact that we already are more than 10% of the way there within days of announcing it, and again, our information is out there already. We already have bought, our first 100 Bitcoin, and we're on our way to 1,000. And we're going to keep on basically moving and updating as we go as to how we're doing on that. Determining the value layer, we've been talking about that, where clearly our one is about education, and not just education, but education about this future of work that we're stepping into. Establishing your capital growth plan, which is, okay, what do you actually think is going to go? Where are you going to be growing with this as well? And also by learning from others and what they're doing, there are giants in the industry like the Microstrategies where you can see just how they're going about attracting the money. I'm sure many of you have seen the news today about like Mara and the fact they had to increase their 0% financing for Bitcoin to $1 billion today. Choose your jurisdiction, right? We chose Singapore. We are a Singapore company. Singapore has 0% capital gains tax, so that puts us in a very different position. We chose Coinbase as our custodian, so we work with the team in Singapore in terms of buying all our Bitcoin. Then buy Bitcoin, do it now, and repeat, right? Like once you've got the foundation, then build it as you go. And just before we come back to get comment on that, it's one thing to look at a company like MicroStrategy, where it's like, well, they're already so far ahead, you can't really basically follow them step by step. We've chosen a different role model, which is Metaplanet. Metaplanet was the same size valuation as us. They had the same challenges we had as a small cap, where they had seen their share price drop by like 90% plus, and they were at about $13 million market cap. Today, they have just gone over $500 million market cap, and it's been only 6 months. And they started also just buying slowly. We are buying faster than they were buying, but they already have just crossed over 1,000 Bitcoin themselves as well. And they're a $500 million business now. And everything that they're doing is about embracing the same things that you're hearing Michael Saylor embrace, but instead of basically shouting at the top of your voice in the US, they're based in Japan. We're based in Singapore. So choose your jurisdiction and then get with the people that are there and realize that most of your investors, they're not necessarily going to be the same investors investing, in the Fortune companies or in the small cap companies. They're more likely people already investing into cryptocurrencies, already investing in this new economy. So go to where they are and basically support them so they can support you. But Metaplanet is a company that we're following along. I'm going to look to get the CEO to come join us on one of our future podcasts as well. And so just coming back to basically these 10 steps and making sure that you are reorientating yourself in the best way. I'd love to ask each of you, what would you highlight as the most important steps for every CEO, CFO listening? Thomas, why don't you kick it off from your side?
Well, it comes back to education, doesn't it? I think you have to get. I think you've got to get. I agree with you. You have to commit, but you've hired experts to your board who committed to this idea 10 years ago. So we've had 10 years of knowledge and insight, both Ian and I, and experienced it. But if you imagine someone starting at the beginning of that and they haven't had any of that time, I think they've got to get their AI knowledge, they've got to get their blockchain knowledge, and they've got to get their Bitcoin knowledge. And, at the same time, they're being bamboozled with climate change plans. So I would say, where do they go to get that knowledge? Because that knowledge is not inside the professional services organizations, not yet anyway. Where do they go? It's not in the universities. It's not in the schools. Where do they go to get that knowledge? Because you've got to get context. And so I think the hardest issue is when you don't understand something, you don't do anything. You make no decision. You make no choice. And if you look at even if you look at the Magnificent Seven, with the exception of Tesla, none of those CFOs have bought any Bitcoin yet. None. So I would say it might be obvious to us because we've been studying it for a decade, but it's not, when it's not obvious, where do you go and get that knowledge? And I don't know where to point people to get that knowledge other than to come to us, but we can't give the knowledge to everybody. Where did they go? And if it's not in your accountant, it's not in your lawyer, and your CFO hasn't picked it up, and it's not in the universities, and it's not in the schools, and it's not coming from the government, it's not coming from the big techs. Where do you go? Ian, help me. Where would you point people? Because people do nothing when they don't understand, and I think that's where we are now. And to me, the whole thing is just like .com. I've got this browser. Have you ever seen a browser before? Oh, what's a browser? What do you use it for? Oh, can you see porn? And that's what people remember back in 94, 95. And I think that's where we are now, with very few people understanding.
Awesome. Well, yeah, on that point, Ian, what I think is very interesting is how you're now based in Dubai, and obviously Dubai is one of our genius cities, and we're seeing these they so get it in that they're already looking at how they build up their crypto community, how they're using Bitcoin in the most effective ways. This is like, you're right in the middle of it, so you're having those conversations every day. Share with people how much of a difference it makes when you immerse yourself in the right community, and what you see as being the biggest keys for any CEO, CFO listening right now.
I think the most important thing what you mentioned was the jurisdiction. Even if you look at the DLTs, I fully support Simon's view. If you look at the educational side, you must know something before you can have a goal. If you want to buy Bitcoin for the sake of buying Bitcoin because you want to jump on the bandwagon, I think that's the wrong approach. You must know. I mean, this country, if you think of some of the countries in the world, their fiat is very, very bad. And if you're there and you do business in the fiat, you're actually exposing yourself to mismanagement at a government level and fraud and corruption. If you look at why Bitcoin actually started, when you look at Zimbabwe and all those countries where people realized their pension and everything disappeared because they placed all their trust in a government that doesn't really care about the real value of that currency, then I would say you've got a very, very good opportunity to hedge yourself against that government exposure, if I can put it that way, to make sure that you actually hedged yourself out of that. And now you've got a stable international, even though it's volatile, it still protects you from that inefficiencies at a government level. So, and that comes back to the point, the jurisdiction. If you really want to participate in this and you are regulated, it doesn't help to be in a country or a region where it's not allowed. You're going to waste your time. You can read and understand everything, but you won't be allowed to put that on your balance sheet. And even if you put it on your balance sheet, the capital costs and all the other costs, the accounting is just going to cost you too much money. It might erode that benefit. So that's why I want to focus on the jurisdiction. Even from a personal perspective, I realized if you really want to make a difference in the DLT space, choose the regions or the jurisdictions where that is not something. Because the first thing that you look at when you participate in the digital space is, what does the regulator allow me to do? And if the crypto exchanges are not allowed in a country, then obviously you're not going to be able to buy or sell any of these digital assets. And that's a critical point. So once you've done that, I think, but before that even, you've got to understand and do the education. And what I wanted to say, from an educational perspective, a lot of people in this space do self-education. You can go to universities, there's a lot of qualifications, but it's not about theoretical knowledge. This is more about application from day one. So you almost need like an apprenticeship, if it makes sense to you, because you've got to understand the digital wallet infrastructure, you've got to understand custody, you've got to understand if you want to do payments, if you need to hold the stuff, the assets, how do you protect yourself that it's not stolen from you? So there's just so many things that the educational part, if you're very passionate about this, you will find lots of opportunities to learn a lot. And I mean, if I just look at all the tweets you sent, is it still called tweets? I don't know what it's called now. If people must actually go and look at the practitioners and see what they actually sharing. I've learned the most of the things I've done is when I used to drive to work is I listen to podcasts and I listen to practitioners. And then there's a lot of like today's podcast where you can participate, you can register. Even on LinkedIn, there's a lot of opportunities to learn. And I think that's the only way.
Yeah, I agree.
Unless you can come to the Genius group and you've got people that actually got the knowledge and the understanding to share that knowledge with you.
Yeah, just to give a couple of examples, like on X, I don't generally go to my homepage to look at the home. I go to my lists where I have different lists. I have my AI Revolution list. I also have got my Bitcoin Treasury list. People are subscribed to this list. Anyone can come in and just subscribe to it. But this is following all of the top Bitcoin advocates and those who are sharing the very, very latest memes and everything else. But basically, this gives me all the information that I need. Like, here's Mara's story about the $1 billion at 0% interest. Like, so you can very quickly basically get a very clear picture of what's happening and how fast things are moving. And I'm using social media not so much as a broadcaster, but as a receiver, right, for the right information in the right way. But what we did also with our site, so just so everyone here knows, because at the end of the day, this is about, information is knowledge, and knowledge is power. That, on our Genius Group site, many of you know about the geniusgroup.net site because that's where we have all of our information. But this is geniusgroup.ai that just launched recently, and you'll see all the news that we have global community, right, and how quickly this is moving. And you also find that basically in news, we've got our regular newsletter, which is AI driven. So basically you're getting a personalized newsletter every single week on all the latest information. So I highly recommend that anyone wants to follow along and look through the lens of what you're hearing on this podcast. There's a way for this to become your daily diet. And that is one of the most important things to be doing right now, is how we educate ourselves. A final thing I'll just share, which is what we're all about, is you don't have to come to Genius to learn about Bitcoin. You don't have to come to Genius to learn about AI. There's plenty of people out there that are sharing that. But what we really believe in is that the future is not what happens with this technology, it's what happens with humans. And so a big part of this is educating every one of us on not just what's our day's work, because we're all going to be in a position where, basically with this future of Manhattan, we're going to be able to create, we won't need to work, right? If we've actually invested in the right way. If you haven't, well, then you're going to still be working, but you're going to be competing with robots. But if you actually are owning those robot armies through basically Bitcoin, through these companies that actually are building out this AI, and then from there, you're then going from basically the money that's coming to you, which is what you're getting, and instead you're thinking about, well, what are you giving, which is your community work, or how are you growing, which is your personal work. And what is that for you? What is your passions? What's your purpose? That's a huge part of what we're doing as well, not using all this technology to replace you, but using it to enhance you. And that's the whole point of igniting your genius. That's why we're called Genius Group. And that's why I'm going to be bringing on these podcasts, the whole idea that each of us, you can either say it's Genius Live or you can say it's Genius Live, right? It's basically how we're living our lives in a way that we've just outsmarted the machines. And that's really what we need to be thinking about, because if we don't do that, well, it's just a matter of time before that technology ends up destroying us anyway. So with that in mind, final words, right? I'm going to be asking everyone to come back this time next week as well. We'll run another podcast and we'll just see it grow over time, and we'll get more and more interactive as we go. We're making note of all those questions you have, and the ones that we can answer, we're going to answer in the chat as well. But just final words from both Thomas and Ian. Who wants to kick it off? What would you like to share as a final thought for everyone? Ian.
Okay, yeah. So no, I just want to say thanks, Roger, for the opportunity. And I want to say to everybody, you lead by example. So I like that if you've got a thought leader that keep people on their toes and enable them to contribute their knowledge, then you 80% there to getting the strategy implemented. And I think just keep on learning and look at as many possible sources as possible to make sure that you enable yourself to identify the goals, the jurisdictions, and follow that 10-step plan. And and I hope to see a lot more companies going this route.
Awesome. Thank you. Thomas.
Yeah, I would say get yourself an account on X, on Twitter, and follow the great minds. There aren't that many. There's only a few hundred. Follow the great minds, stay on the cutting edge, and bring your board members up to date so they can begin the process of reconfiguring their organization around AI, blockchain, and Bitcoin.
Thank you very much for that. And my final word is the reason that I listed on the NYC American, even at the beginning, why would a Singapore company come all the way to the US to do that? Was that I really believed in what Peter Diamandis talks about, like having an impact on 1 billion people. And I really believe that by actually having a listed company, it would allow us to not just have that billion-fold impact, but actually become $1 billion business as well. We have had a crazy 2 years since we had the IPO, and we've tried all sorts of different things, knowing that for every person who's looking to value create, there's people looking to value destroy. We are constantly finding new ways, and that's the one biggest thing is perseverance. We have actually come across a whole new pathway now, an entire wave, which actually works very, very well. You know, our current Bitcoin treasury does not need to grow much for it to be worth more than the entire market cap of our company right now. But if we follow the same pathway as MetaPlanet, as we follow the pathway of the likes of Microstrategy, and we share that with others as well, then this isn't just the impact that we can have within our own company, with our own team, our own shareholders, our own customers. It's also the impact we can have on our peers in the marketplace as well. So we are going to be giving a front row seat for everybody who is following along on this incredible revolution that we are currently going through. And this is not a once in a generation revolution. This is once in an epoch revolution. And I think that is one of the most exciting things about this, to be coming from the point of view of education. So thanks very much, Thomas. Thanks very much, Ian. Thanks very much, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.